It's crazy to be excited because you finally get to review something that's good. Welcome to Mills on Reels. This is Miller Bruce, and today we're going to be talking about Palmer, a film from Apple Plus, which I'm really excited about because I finally have one that I can recommend for you guys. This film features Justin Timberlake, who I last saw in a film called In Time, which wasn't the most spectacular performance, but apparently I missed a standout performance in a movie called Alpha Dog, which Ray swears by and says he will put our friendship on the line in me thinking that's a great film, so I do recommend that you check that out. This film was directed by Fisher Stevens, who you may not know from acting. When I show you this picture, you're going to remember him. He was in Short Circuit, also in The Mario Brothers and The Blacklist. This is his directorial debut, or one of his early director films, and he does a good job in it. Not extraordinary, but he does well enough. The film's pacing, it kind of falls off towards the end, but for the most part, I was fully engaged in this. Cheryl Guerrero is the one who actually wrote this before she wrote Hunting Season, which was not extraordinary, and she also wrote the Paris Hilton film Pledge This. So she's stair-stepping and improving across the course of time with her actual productions. We also get to meet Ryder Allen, who plays the most adorable kid who's in the LGBTQ plus community, which is a part of the story. I won't specifically say where he fits into that spectrum because of the fact that they don't really make it that clear. All you really need to know is that he's a kid that at the very least likes to wear dresses, and going to the actual stage design and the costume design, everything here actually fit well. The setting was perfect. To me, the fact that it was in a small town made a huge impact. But before I get too far into it, let's talk about the premise of this film. Palmer is an ex-convict who's coming home and being reacclimated to his environment. He ends up staying with his grandmother, who's renting out a trailer to a very obvious drug-addicted woman who has an abusive boyfriend. And then they have a son, Sam, played by Ryder Allen. Now, Sam is a little boy who likes to wear dresses, and you can imagine how the backdrop of this small town actually makes this a more strenuous situation for him because of the fact that these people are not necessarily going to have the most exposure to this kind of experience before. I remember watching a specific comedy special with this woman who's from Tasmania. I'll post it on the screen who I'm talking about, but she talks about going through the challenge of being in a place where nobody really understands you, and then as a result, you can't fully understand yourself. And this kid doesn't even really have access to the internet. So you can imagine the difficulties that he's facing, that his parents would be facing, his mother especially, if she can get off the drugs temporarily. Palmer comes home. He can't find work. We do a great job of looking at the different difficulties that an ex-convict is going to have to deal with. And he goes around town. Now, when he meets up with his old friends, you catch that there's some kind of tension between him and his friend who was a police officer, which I initially thought of as, well, he's the law and this guy just got out of prison, so obviously he's not going to be friends with a police officer. But the guy mentions, my dad wouldn't have it any other way, which is a point that will come up later when I talk about spoilers. That being said, Palmer ends up going to work at the school that this kid is at. And at the school, he gets to see firsthand Sam being bullied. He sees that he's in a bad situation. And while he doesn't want to be involved in it, this kid is always at his grandmother's house. Now, the question becomes, how will he navigate becoming being an ex-convict in this circumstance and maintain his gainful employment? Now, I want to go into spoilers moving forward, so what I will say to you before I go into spoilers is I do recommend this film. Justin Timberlake does a good job. This is a good film to watch. I think they did a great job in the film overall, but there are some points that I would change. And that being said, we're going to get into spoilers. Now, Justin Timberlake, he goes to work at this school. He ends up getting a job as a janitor. When he first gets out of prison, he goes to the bar with his friends and he's hanging out, and he runs into Sam's mother, who is Shelly. And Juno Temple plays Shelly. She does a fantastic job. She's a drug addicted, unfit mother. She is that to a T in this film. I could not have asked her to play this role better. She's also somewhat sympathetic because you understand that she knows something is wrong with her, but she also doesn't want to relinquish having responsibility for this child who she clearly cannot raise. Moving forward, we see that she leaves for long periods of time and leaves her son at the grandmother's house. When he goes to the bar, he actually sees sees Shelly. He knows that she's the one renting out this house, but Shelly's trying to, hook up with him, and he's been in prison for a long time. So he makes the mistake, does the walk of shame in front of his grandmother, comes out. The kid obviously recognizes, you were at my house with no clothes on, and you know how honest children are. Sam is the same way, in his own adorable way. I do want to take a quick note to point out that the way that they wrote Sam, he is the most sympathetic child that you can imagine. Even though he's dealing with all of these different issues, he's still polite and considerate of other people, which is an amazing thing to see for somebody who's dealing with a situation like this. So Sam befriends Palmer. Palmer reluctantly is around this kid, but he's not fully bought into the relationship with this kid. He's just kind of trying to look out for him, but really looking out for himself, and doesn't want to get involved until the grandmother passes away. Now, my grandmother recently passed away, so this was kind of hard for me to really watch through. I did become emotional at multiple points throughout the film, not just because the grandmother's passing away, but the way that they introduced the scenario by which Sam and Palmer are actually together is very organic, and it's something that if you were in the situation, a lot of people think about the lead up to acknowledging the fact that your child is a part of this community and the challenges they're going to face. But Palmer has this kind of thrust upon him. Now, he goes down to the precinct, and initially he's going to hand Sam over to the authorities, basically put him in Child Protective Services. But then once he realizes that Sam is going to go into the very same system that he himself, in a sense, just came out of, he can't bring himself to abandon Sam, even though he legitimately is like, I don't want to deal with this kid, because he actually knows that he was purposed for this in a sense. He himself grew up in a single parent home. He knows what it's like to have an unreliable mother, as his mother abandoned him when he was 5 years old, and his dad had to raise him since he was a kid. So he is uniquely prepared to be the person that Sam actually needs. He ends up stepping in on his behalf, addressing bullies on his behalf. And then they even have a scene later on where the kid comes home and he's been being bullied, and Palmer's trying to tell him, you have to stand up to them. It doesn't matter that they're bigger than you or that they're older than you. And he says, how much bigger and older were these kids? And Sam says to him, they were like 20-something years or something like that. So an adult is abusing Sam when he goes over for a play date. So Palmer, the dad instinct activates. You start to realize like Palmer really does care more for this kid than he was willing to admit. And he starts to consider actually adopting the kid. Now, the person that he had to go beat up was one of his friends from back in the day in this small town. He apparently messed with the kid. And during that confrontation, he actually confronts the police officer, because he's there on the scene at the bar when he actually beats up one of his friends, and he says to him, if your dad wants to come after me for this, then let it be known that I'm going to tell the truth about what happened with me and you. And what you come to find out is that Palmer, when he was younger, and this is not a super sympathetic story, they're not trying to make him into a white knight or a hero in this sense. He was in high school. He was the high school quarterback from his town. He ends up being great, breaking all kinds of records. He goes to go play a D1 football, but then he ends up falling and making mistakes in life. He ends up getting on drugs and stuff. He can't take some of the pain from the injuries that he's facing. He ends up having a botched robbery where he kills this man who pulls a gun on them, and then Palmer takes the blame for this. That's the reason why they had the uneasiness between him and the officer in the beginning. Now, next thing that happens, of course, we have to have more controversy in this. The grandmother, after she passed, she decided to donate her home to the church and only left Palmer with $500. So now he's trying to figure out how he's going to take care of this kid. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And he's also a convict. So, he's already on thin ice with respect to them giving him responsibility. Now, he does meet this teacher who's a single, attractive, young teacher in the area. She's a divorcee. Their romance is actually pretty believable. It's organic the way that it works out. They end up seeing each other romantically. She helps him with Sam. She sees his heart for Sam, which is the reason why she actually, I think, trusts him in the film. So at the end of the film, he ends up making this impassioned plea because of the fact that Child Protective Services have been called in because they saw Palmer with this kid, and the woman who saw him knew he was an ex-convict. So she called Child Protective Services. They investigate the kid. Then they investigate and find out that, oh yeah, there's been abuse going on possibly at the house. They're not sure, but maybe she's an unfit mother. And they decide to have this hearing where they're going to see if they're going to keep this kid or not. Palmer makes this impassioned plea. The judge says no because of the fact that he's not on his feet the way she wants him to be, but then ends up rewarding custody back to the mother. Now, Palmer confronts the mother and he has this conversation with her. He's like, listen, you should just please give up custody of your child to me. And the mom takes it as this personal affront about the kind of woman that she is, and she's not a bad person and stuff like that, but she clearly is drugged out. And even when she's talking to him most of the time, the only time she actually is sober when she shows up to the court. Now, I'm not going to tell you the ending to the film. I mean, it's anticlimactic to me because after the point in the courtroom, it kind of just tapers off. And that's where I'll get into the heavier critiques of the film. Justin Timberlake is a good actor, and I will give this movie an 8 out of 10. I recommend it. I think you should check out Palmer. It's a great film on Disney+. But where it fell short for me were a couple of different places. Number one, while Justin Timberlake is a great actor, he's not the best actor, and the acting of his role could have been done a little bit better. Number two, one thing that I noticed in Palmer in the film, Sam is a fantastic child. You would take care of this kid, and you don't really have to think about it in the context of him being a part of this community. It's more so like a child in need at the base level. To me, human decency, you should work with this kid. It's going to be a challenge, and it's something that Palmer has never dealt with because that's not his background, but he is going to be game for helping him navigate this because it's the one thing that he does really well in life throughout the film is taking care of this kid and being a father the way that his father was a father to him, being a single dad. But I have been in different situations and worked with different kids who are in the system. And while this film does a great job of portraying this fantastic, almost perfect child, the reality is in real life, those kids come out and they sometimes are damaged. They're rough around the edges. Some of the most extreme outbursts that I've seen have been from kids who are in those situations. I remember being a camp counselor, and one kid was calling the other counselors every name in the book. So they come and get me as the lead counselor or whatever. And I'm talking to this kid, and come to find out, this kid is acting out because they took him from his mother, and basically he's going to go back into the system, and he doesn't understand the concept of his mother was being charged with a crime. So he's going into the system. He's only even in the camp because of a charity program for the system, and he only gets to be there for a week. And the reason why he's acting out is because he just wants his mom back. And so, yeah, people who have had to adopt before, some of those kids, because of the situations they've been in before, and they're just as deserving of the love, if not more so, some of those kids are not going to come out as clean cut as Sam is in the movie. And I would love to see a movie where Palmer had to struggle with the difficulties of raising a child and going to counseling and getting the work done that they need to get done, because they're going to have to get counseling after all this stuff that happened. And so that's the part where I think that, the happily ever after of him just driving off. Once again, some of the situations of him being an ex-convict, I will tell you that the town was more sympathetic, but they could have taken it to further extremes and explored what it's really like to be typecast in this way and how hard it is for you to find gainful employment or even balance the books when you're technically working a job where you're probably being paid minimum wage and you're trying to take care of a kid on top of that. There's parts where the film does fall short. The pacing kind of dies at the end, but overall, I really enjoyed this film. I highly recommend it. Please let me know what you thought about Palmer in the comments below. With that being said, please like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time on Meals on Reels. Peace.